He had always believed his house was the one place no one could cross a line. It sat at the edge of the neighborhood, backing up to a stretch of old trees and open land. He bought it for the privacy. No shared walls, no common yard, no reason for strangers to ever step onto his property. The Homeowners Association had rules, of course, but he followed them. He paid his fees on time, kept his lawn trimmed, and stayed out of neighborhood drama. Most days were quiet. Mornings started with coffee on the back porch. Evenings ended with long walks through his own yard, checking on the fence and listening to the wind move through the trees. He worked from home, so peace mattered to him more than anything. That was why what happened next felt so unreal. It's like a scene from someone else's life. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. A white van pulled up in front of his house just after lunch. He noticed it only because it stopped right at his driveway. Two people stepped out, holding clipboards. They walked toward his front door without hesitation, like they had been there before. He assumed they were lost. When he opened the door, one of them smiled and said, "Hi, we're here to check the backyard access for the setup." He stared at them, confused. Set up for what? The smile didn't fade. For the wedding this weekend? For a moment, he thought it was a joke. Maybe they had the wrong house. He pointed down the street and said, "You're mistaken. There's no wedding here." The woman checked her clipboard. She read the address out loud. It was his address. Every number was correct. She looked up again and said, "This is the location approved by the HOA. Ceremony in the backyard. Reception tent near the trees." His chest tightened. "No one asked me. This is my private property." The two exchanged an awkward look. The man cleared his throat and said, "You might want to call the HOA office. We were just sent to take measurements." They left soon after, but the calm of the house was already broken. He stood in the doorway long after they drove away, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. He immediately called the HOA. Number listed on the welcome packet he still had in a drawer. It rang for a while before going to voicemail. He left a short message saying there must be a mistake and asking for a callback as soon as possible. Less than an hour later, another vehicle arrived. This time, it was a truck loaded with folded chairs. Dozens of them. The driver hopped out and asked where to unload. That was when panic turned into anger. He told the driver to stop and explained that no event was allowed on his property. The driver shrugged and said he was just following orders. He showed a printed document with the HOA logo at the top and the homeowner's address listed clearly. The driver left, not before saying, "You should sort this out quick. We're coming back tomorrow." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. He couldn't focus on work. Every sound outside made him look up. He felt like his home had suddenly been marked, claimed by people who didn't belong there. That evening, an email finally came from the HOA. It was short and written in a polite but cold tone. It said the HOA had approved a community-sponsored wedding event to be held at his property due to its scenic value and size. It mentioned that the event would promote community spirit and that his cooperation was appreciated. There was no apology, no question, just a statement. He read the email 3 times, hoping he misunderstood. He hadn't. He replied immediately, saying he never agreed to this and did not give permission. He explained that the house and land were privately owned and not part of any shared space. The response came quickly this time. The HOA claimed that certain properties, including his, were listed as potential community use locations under an old clause in the bylaws. They said the wedding was already booked and paid for by the couple, and that canceling it would cause embarrassment and possible financial loss. He felt his hands shake as he read those words. They were talking about embarrassment while ignoring the fact that strangers planned to take over his home that night. He barely slept. The next morning, more signs appeared that this was really happening. A landscaping crew showed up at the edge of his yard, talking about leveling ground for a tent. He stopped them before they even unloaded their tools. Neighbors began to notice. Some walked by slowly, pretending to admire the trees while clearly listening. Others waved and asked if he was excited for the big weekend. One neighbor laughed and said, "It'll be nice to have something fun around here for once." He forced a smile but said nothing. Inside, he felt isolated. It was clear many people believed the HOA had the right to do this. Later that day, he went to the HOA office in person. The building was small but well kept. Inside, framed photos of past community events lined the walls. He stood at the front desk and asked to speak to someone in charge. After a short wait, a board member came out. The man spoke calmly, almost cheerfully, as if discussing a minor inconvenience. He repeated what the email had said. He talked about community benefit and temporary use. When the homeowner raised his voice, asking how anyone could think this was acceptable, the board member frowned and reminded him to remain respectful. That was when it became clear this was not a misunderstanding. They truly believed they could do this. When he asked to see the clause in the bylaws, the board member said it would take time to retrieve and suggested he relax and enjoy being part of something special. He left the office feeling dismissed and small, but also something else began to form beneath the anger: determination. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table with stacks of papers. He pulled out the purchase documents from when he bought the house. He searched old HOA emails. He logged into the HOA website and downloaded every bylaw and amendment he could find as the hours passed. One thing became clear. The rules were confusing, full of vague language and written in a way that seemed to give the board a lot of power. But none of it clearly said they could use private property without permission. Still, the wedding was only days away. On Thursday, another email arrived. This one warned him that refusing access could result in fines for violating HOA cooperation rules. The tone was sharper now, less friendly. He looked out the window at his quiet yard. He imagined strangers walking across it, music playing, people laughing where he usually sat in silence. The thought made his stomach turn. That night, he received a flyer in his mailbox. It was a wedding announcement. His address was printed on it as the venue. That was the moment everything changed. Up until then, he had hoped reason would win. That someone at the HOA would realize the mistake and stop this before it went too far. But seeing his home advertised like a rental hall made him realize they had no intention of backing down. They had crossed a line. He folded the flyer slowly and placed it on the table. He didn't feel panic anymore. He felt calm, focused. If they wanted to play by rules, he would make sure every rule was followed. Not just theirs, but the real ones. And if they thought he would simply give up his home for their convenience, they were about to learn how wrong they were. He spent the next morning going over every letter, every email, and every document he could find from the HOA. He had a notebook filled with scribbles and highlighted lines. The more he read, the more frustrated he became. The rules were full of vague phrases like community benefit and shared responsibility. But nowhere did it say the HOA could book private homes for events. It was clear now that the board was acting on assumptions, an old, unclear language rather than anything legitimate. Still, knowing the rules wasn't enough. The wedding was just 2 days away, and the HOA seemed completely confident that they could proceed. The first crew had already left behind chairs and small decorations at the edge of the driveway when he returned home the previous evening. It was as if they were claiming the space bit by bit, testing his response. He decided to visit the office again. Walking into the small HOA building, he felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. The receptionist gave him a polite smile, but didn't try to stop him. He asked to see the president of the board directly. A man came out from behind a door. He was in his late 50s, wearing a pressed shirt and a calm smile. "Good morning," he said. "How can I help you today?" "Cut the formalities," the homeowner said. "My house. My property. You're scheduling a wedding here without permission. That stops now." The man's smile didn't falter. "I understand your concern, but everything is in order. The wedding has been paid for. The HOA has approved the use, and the couple is expecting a beautiful event. We hope you'll cooperate." Cooperate. The word left his mouth sharper than intended. "You think I'm going to cooperate with strangers using my home while you sit here in comfort? Do you even know what private property means?" The board president sighed. "We are trying to serve the community. It's only a few hours, and it will make the neighborhood look better. Everyone benefits." Surely you can see that? The homeowner's hands clenched. Everyone benefits except me. I get a house full of strangers, noise, and chaos. And if I refuse, you'll fine me, threaten me, and make it seem like I'm the problem. The man leaned back, trying to maintain composure. We're just following procedure. This is standard for community-approved events. You should see it as an honor. You're helping to create memories for someone. Memories. My memories matter too. What about my life and my home? The homeowner took a deep breath. Let's be clear. I will not allow anyone on my property. I'm not negotiating. I will not cooperate. The man's calm smile cracked slightly. You might want to reconsider. Fines can add up quickly, and legal action is possible. We have records of your failure to cooperate in the past. Failure to cooperate? You're scheduling a wedding at my house without permission? That's the real failure. The conversation ended with the president retreating behind his office door, leaving the homeowner with the sense that the HOA wasn't planning to change its mind. They were confident, smug even, that rules, fines, and vague bylaws gave them the power to ignore him. Returning home, he felt a mixture of anger and determination. He wasn't going to let them take control of his life. Sitting at his kitchen table, he spread out every document, highlighted every relevant line, and scribbled notes. He realized that he needed proof. Proof that they had no legal right to do this. Proof that he could use if it came to a fight. His research revealed more than he expected. The property deed clearly stated the house was for private use. The zoning laws for the neighborhood prohibited commercial or public gatherings on private property without explicit consent. The bylaws mentioned community events, but only referred to shared spaces such as parks or clubhouses. His backyard was never shared. Never communal. In other words, the HOA was overreaching, and there was no legal backing for what they were trying to do. That evening, he walked the yard, thinking about the people who would arrive in 2 days. Guests, caterers, decorators, photographers, all assuming they had permission. He imagined the music, the laughter, and the strangers wandering through his private space. His stomach tightened at the thought. He decided to act carefully. He couldn't just storm the wedding, but he could make sure every step they took was on notice. He began documenting everything. He took photos of the driveway, the backyard, the edge of the trees where tents might go. He recorded every call from the HOA, every voicemail, every email. Every piece of communication became evidence. Neighbors noticed his vigilance. Some stopped to ask what was happening. Is it true? They asked, nodding toward the decorations that were quietly arriving at the edges of the street. He explained briefly, trying not to get into an argument, but most didn't know what to think. Some assumed he was exaggerating. Some seemed mildly amused. Only a few looked concerned, as if they were realizing the HOA might have gone too far. The next day, more crews appeared. Tent poles, chairs, and decorative arches were unloaded at the curb. A small group of decorators even started measuring the lawn from outside the fence. He stepped outside, clearly visible, and politely but firmly told them to leave. They showed him the paperwork with the HOA logo again and insisted they had instructions. That doesn't change anything, he said. This is private property. You are not allowed here. Frustrated, the decorators packed up, muttering to each other. The homeowner knew this was only a temporary victory. The real test was whether the HOA would enforce the event anyway. That evening, another email arrived, more threatening this time. It mentioned fines escalating every day and hinted at legal action. It even suggested that refusing the event might put his membership in the HOA at risk. He read it carefully, then closed his laptop and walked to the back porch. He realized that the HOA wasn't simply ignorant. They were intentionally using intimidation. They assumed he would back down, pay the fines, and allow the wedding. They believed the rules and vague bylaws gave them power. But they didn't know how far he was willing to go. The next morning, he received a call from one of the wedding planners. She sounded flustered. "Hi, we're just checking on the backyard," she said. "Are we good to proceed?" He held the phone tightly. "No, you are not proceeding. My property. My rules. I do not give permission for anyone to be here." There was a pause. He could hear the tension in her voice. But the HOA said, "I don't care what the HOA said. They have no authority here. You cannot proceed. Leave immediately." She hung up quickly. He smiled briefly. For the first time in days, he felt a small victory. The weekend was coming fast. He spent the day walking the perimeter of the yard, imagining scenarios. What if the guests arrived anyway? What if the HOA tried to force access? He realized he needed more than words. He needed a plan that could stop them completely, legally, and safely. Late that night, he sat down with a flashlight and the notebook of rules, zoning laws, and HOA documents. Every line of evidence mattered. Every note, every email, every clause in the bylaws could be used to protect his home. He highlighted, circled, and made margin notes. He began drafting a timeline of what could happen and how he could respond. By the time he went to bed, exhaustion had set in, but his mind was alive with strategy. For the first time, he wasn't just reacting. He was planning. He was preparing. And he was ready to make sure the HOA learned a lesson they would not forget. He didn't know exactly how it would play out. He didn't know if the HOA would back down or escalate further. But he knew one thing: he would not give up his home. He would not allow strangers to invade his life, and he would not let intimidation win. The house, once quiet and peaceful, now held the tension of an approaching storm. He felt a strange mix of fear and determination. He knew the weekend would be critical. He knew the next moves would decide whether he could protect his property or be forced to surrender it, and he was ready to fight not with anger alone, but with every rule, law, and piece of evidence on his side. He finally turned off the lights, leaving the porch illuminated just enough to see the lawn, the fence, and the edge of the trees. Tomorrow, the next chapter would begin. Tomorrow, he would face the HOA and show them that private property was not negotiable, no matter how confident they thought they were. This was no longer just about a wedding. It was about his home, his rights, and his life, and he would not back down. He woke up the next morning with a sense of urgency he had never felt before. The weekend was coming, and with it, the wedding the HOA insisted on holding in his backyard. He had already tried talking, explaining, arguing, and documenting. Nothing had stopped them so far. The HOA was confident, almost smug, that they could do as they pleased. He realized he needed a deeper understanding of exactly what he was dealing with. This wasn't just about saying no anymore. He needed to find legal footing, loopholes, and clear evidence that would make it impossible for them to force the wedding on his property. He started by reviewing his property deed again, this time line by line, looking for anything that might be relevant. Every paragraph of legal language felt overwhelming at first, but slowly, patterns emerged. There were clauses about easements, rules for shared spaces, restrictions on commercial activity, and more. The one thing that stood out was a clear statement that the property was private and that any public or commercial activity required explicit written permission from the amended homeowner. That meant, in black and white, the HOA could not legally schedule events on his property without his consent. Encouraged by this discovery, he dug deeper. He pulled up local zoning laws on his laptop, scanning for anything that could support his case. Zoning rules were long and technical, filled with language about public use, permits, and occupancy limits. One line caught his eye. Private residential property may not be used for public gatherings or commercial events without a permit issued by municipal authorities. That meant the HOA was potentially not just overstepping their own rules, but also breaking city regulations. Next, he reviewed the HOA bylaws. They were filled with vague language like community, use in events promoting neighborhood, engagement. But nowhere did it say the board could schedule private property for events without the owner's permission. There were references to parks, clubhouses, and other shared spaces. But his backyard didn't appear anywhere in the documents. His heart pounded as he realized he had a solid argument if he chose to pursue it. He decided he needed outside help. Calling a local attorney who specialized in property law, he explained the situation. The lawyer listened patiently, asking detailed questions about the property, HOA rules, and the upcoming wedding. After a long discussion, The lawyer said something that made him both relieved and nervous. From what you've described, they have no legal right to hold any event on your property without written consent. You are well within your rights to refuse access, and you can even seek an injunction if they try to proceed. That evening, he went over the documents and emails again, this time preparing a binder that contained everything: HOA correspondence, zoning laws, property deeds, and his notes from conversations with the lawyer. He highlighted key passages, made notes in the margins, and organized it so he could quickly reference any section. The binder felt heavy in his hands, but also empowering. Even with all this preparation, he couldn't ignore the human element. The HOA board was confident, neighbors were curious, and wedding planners were already making arrangements. He realized that if he wanted to stop the event, he needed to combine legal strategy with clear communication. If anyone showed up expecting permission, they needed to see the reality of the rules and the law. Late at night, he walked through the backyard, imagining every possible scenario. What if someone tried to enter anyway? What if the HOA sent security or threatened fines? He visualized himself standing calmly, holding the documents, explaining why no one could legally proceed. He imagined taking photos of any preparations, documenting every step. He realized that preparation wasn't just about law. It was about being ready to respond without fear. Over the next day, he contacted the city office to ask about permits for public gatherings. He explained the situation without going into unnecessary details, simply asking if any events were registered for his address. The clerk confirmed that no permits had been issued for his property. That meant the HOA and the wedding planners were moving forward without municipal approval. With each piece of information, his confidence grew. The HOA might be bold, but their overreach left them vulnerable. He started drafting a detailed letter to the HOA board. He wrote calmly, clearly, and firmly. He cited the property deed, zoning laws, and bylaws, explaining that they had no authority to schedule events on his private property. He emphasized that any attempt to proceed would be considered trespassing and a violation of city regulations. Neighbors continued to notice the unusual activity. Some came by to ask what was happening, curious and slightly amused. Others were wary, sensing tension. He explained as little as possible, but enough to make them understand the seriousness. Some nodded in support, others shook their heads, unsure how far the HOA would go. He realized that public perception mattered, but he also knew he couldn't rely on it. The real battle was legal and personal, protecting his home by midweek. The first real signs of the wedding preparation began. Delivery trucks arrived with floral decorations, tables, and chairs. They stopped at the curb when they saw him standing at the edge of the yard, arms crossed. He showed them the documents he had prepared on his phone: proof of ownership, zoning restrictions, and city regulations. Some of the workers hesitated. It's uncertain whether to proceed. You have to follow instructions from the HOA. One of them said nervously, "I'm not saying you shouldn't," he replied calmly. "I'm saying my property cannot be used without my permission. If you enter, it's trespassing, and the city can enforce it. Please leave." After a tense few minutes, the workers packed up and left, muttering complaints to each other. The homeowner felt a brief surge of satisfaction. This was only the first small victory, but it showed that preparation and knowledge could stop them. The next day, he visited the HOA office once more. This time, he brought copies of the zoning laws and property deed. He requested a formal meeting with the board. They agreed, likely expecting a short, dismissible conversation. He entered the room with calm determination, placing the documents on the table in front of them. "This is why the wedding cannot happen," he said clearly, pointing to highlighted sections. "I am the legal owner of this property. Zoning laws prohibit public events without a permit. Your own bylaws do not give you permission to use private property for community events. Any attempt to hold this event is unlawful." The board members exchanged nervous glances. One of them tried to argue about tradition and community benefit, but he calmly responded, "Tradition cannot override the law. Community benefit cannot override ownership rights. My home is not a shared space. My consent is required, and it has not been given."
How the room grew silent.
The homeowner realized the power of clarity and evidence. The board had counted on vague rules and assumed fear to intimidate him. Now, faced with clear documentation, their confidence faltered. Walking out of the office, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The weekend was still approaching, and the wedding planners might still try to arrive. But he had established that he was informed, prepared, and ready. He knew the next step was not confrontation yet, but vigilance. Any action by the HOA or planners could now be documented, giving him further leverage if needed. Back at home, he spent the rest of the day mapping the property in detail. He marked areas that could be used for tents, parking, or decorations, noting entrances and boundaries. He wanted to be ready to point out clearly where access was prohibited. He also set up his camera to record any uninvited entry, creating a timeline that could be used as evidence if anyone tried to force their way in. As the sun set, he realized how much his life had changed in just a few days. The quiet peace of his home was now charged with tension and strategy, but there was also a sense of empowerment he had not felt before. For the first time, he was actively protecting his space, using knowledge, planning, and patience as tools. He reviewed the binder once more, making mental notes of each argument, law, and clause. He imagined different scenarios and rehearsed his responses. The wedding was no longer just a nuisance. It had become a test of resolve, a challenge he was ready to meet. The evening ended with him sitting on the back porch, looking at the trees in the quiet yard. He felt the tension of the coming weekend, but he also felt calm, confident, and prepared. The HOA had assumed he would panic or back down, but they had underestimated his determination. He knew the weekend would reveal who truly had control, a stubborn homeowner who understood the law, or an overreaching board that had ignored boundaries for too long. He turned off the porch light and went inside, ready to face the next day. The real test was close, and he felt ready for it. This wasn't just about stopping a wedding. It was about standing up for his rights, protecting his home, and proving that knowledge, patience, preparation could triumph over arrogance and intimidation, and he was determined to win. The morning of the weekend arrived with a strange mix of calm and tension. The sky was clear, and the sun rose over the quiet neighborhood like any other day, but the streets felt different. Delivery trucks were lining up near the curb, and he could already hear the faint rumble of music from a sound system being tested several houses down. The HOA had clearly assumed that their plan would proceed smoothly. He stepped outside, coffee in hand, and walked slowly along the edge of his yard. He observed everything carefully, where trucks were parked, which decorations were being unloaded, and which workers were setting up. His heart beat faster than usual, but there was no panic. Every step of this morning would matter, and he was ready. He checked his camera system, making sure every entrance and corner of the property was being monitored. He had prepared for this moment for days. Every document, every law, every note he had made over the past week was within reach. The HOA thought he would back down under pressure, but he had spent hours learning the rules, preparing legal backing, and planning for every possible scenario. The first group of people arrived at the front gate, carrying folding chairs and small tables. They paused when they saw him standing on the porch, notebook and papers in hand. One of the workers approached cautiously. "Are we clear to unload here?" the worker asked. He held up a copy of his property deed and zoning regulation printouts. "This is private property. You do not have permission to be here. Any attempt to enter is trespassing and a violation of local law. Please leave immediately." The worker glanced at the papers, confused, then muttered something under his breath and stepped back. His colleagues hesitated, unsure what to do next. Some looked toward the street, hoping for instructions. But he could see that their confidence was shaken. By mid-morning, more trucks arrived. These were larger ones, carrying floral arches, tents, and even a small sound system. The wedding planners stepped out, looking irritated. They carried clipboards and phones, checking schedules and delivery lists. He walked toward them slowly, holding a copy of the city permit records. "No permit exists for this property," he said firmly. "You are not allowed to proceed. Leave now, or you will be committing a violation of the law." The lead planner hesitated, then looked toward the street where a few neighbors were starting to gather. Some were curious, some confused, others clearly enjoying the spectacle. "The HOA approved this," the planner said. "That does not give you permission," he replied calmly. "Ownership of this property requires consent from the homeowner. No consent has been given. You are not legally authorized to hold this event here." A small argument broke out among the crew, but he didn't flinch. He stayed calm, projecting confidence. Slowly, they began to pack up the equipment they had brought onto the curb. Some were angry, some muttered complaints about losing time and money. He let them work while keeping a watchful eye. Then came the moment he had been waiting for. A representative from the HOA arrived in a black SUV, parking in front of the house with an air of authority. A few board members stepped out, carrying clipboards and looking around as if they owned the street. He met them at the edge of the driveway. "Good morning," he said evenly. "This is private property. You do not have permission to schedule an event here. All preparation must stop immediately." One of the board members smiled, attempting to maintain control. "We understand your concern, but this event has already been scheduled and paid for. We need your cooperation for the community's sake." "I will not cooperate," he said firmly. "My property, my rules, this is not negotiable. You are welcome to verify the laws and zoning codes if you need proof. I have it here." He handed over copies of the property deed, the municipal permit records showing no event was approved, and printed copies of zoning laws prohibiting public gatherings on private residential land. The faces of the board members changed. Confidence gave way to uncertainty. They read through the documents, muttering under their breath. "You can't just," one member started, but he interrupted. "I can and I will enforce my rights. This is my home. You have no authority here. Any attempt to proceed will be illegal." By now, several neighbors were watching from across the street. Some came closer to see what was happening. A few whispered to one another, clearly surprised by the homeowner's calm and preparedness. He noticed their expressions shift from curiosity to respect as they saw him standing firm, backed by clear evidence. Then he heard the low rumble of heavy machinery approaching from the far side of the yard. A large bulldozer rolled up the street, moving into position legally for a scheduled landscaping project he had arranged days earlier. The driver waved as he stopped. "This is my property," he said. "The bulldozer is here for authorized maintenance work. Any interference with this equipment is prohibited." The sight of the bulldozer caused a ripple of panic among the HOA and the wedding planners. Trucks that had been partially unloaded froze in place. Some planners whispered frantically into phones, clearly realizing the situation was slipping out of their control. The bulldozer moved slowly, marking its presence clearly on the property. The homeowner remained calm, standing near the porch with the binder of documents in hand. Every move was deliberate. Every action reinforced his control over the situation. City officials arrived shortly after, responding to a call he had placed days earlier. 2 officers stepped onto the street asking what was happening. He calmly explained the situation, showing them the property deed, zoning restrictions, and lack of permits for the wedding. The officers nodded, reviewing the materials. They confirmed that holding the event would violate municipal rules. The HOA board members turned pale. "We didn't realize one of them started," the officer cut him off. "No event can proceed without permits," the officer said. "This is private property. You have no authority here. The homeowner's rights are protected by law. Any attempt to ignore this will result in enforcement action." The wedding planners and crew began hurriedly loading trucks and equipment. The decorations, chairs, and sound systems were removed from the street. The HOA members tried to argue, but the presence of the homeowner, legal documents, and law enforcement left them powerless. Neighbors watching cheered quietly, some clapping as the final trucks pulled away. The homeowner remained on the porch, keeping a steady eye on the scene until the last of the equipment was gone. The board president tried one last time to assert authority. "This is ridiculous. The community does not need my private property," the homeowner interrupted. "You have overstepped your authority, and this ends now. The law is clear. My consent is required. You will not proceed." Defeated, the board members retreated to their vehicles. Some muttered apologies, others said nothing at all. The neighborhood had watched a complete reversal of power. A homeowner who had been pushed to the edge had calmly, firmly, and legally asserted control over his own property. After the chaos ended, he walked through the yard inspecting every corner. The bulldozer had been used as planned for maintenance, marking the land without interfering with any other property. He felt relief wash over him. The tension of the past week had transformed into satisfaction. Later that day, neighbors came by to offer congratulations. Some brought coffee, others simply waved and smiled. A few mentioned they had doubted whether anyone could stand up to the HOA, but seeing him prepared, confident, and calm had changed their minds. He realized that the battle was not just about stopping the wedding. It was about asserting boundaries, enforcing rights, and showing that knowledge, preparation, and calm determination could overcome arrogance and assumed authority. By evening, the neighborhood returned to normal. The HOA members left, the wedding planners were gone, and the yard was quiet once again. The homeowner walked through his property, feeling the calm he had cherished for years slowly returning. Knew there would be follow-up emails and perhaps some lingering tension with the HOA, but he had made it clear that private property could not be taken for granted. He had turned a potential disaster into a demonstration of control, lawfulness, and quiet strength. Sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, he watched the sun dip behind the trees. The sound of the bulldozer engines had faded, replaced by the normal hum of the neighborhood. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The weekend had begun with tension, fear, and uncertainty. It ended with clarity, authority, and victory. He had faced an overreaching HOA and emerged not just unscathed, but respected, calm, and empowered. The experience had changed him. He realized that boundaries were not just physical, but also legal and personal. Standing firm had required patience, knowledge, and courage. The lesson was clear: preparation, calmness, and determination could turn even the most intimidating situation into a triumph. And as he sipped his coffee, watching the quiet yard, he felt certain that nothing would ever take his home from him again. The morning after the showdown, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. For days, the streets had been buzzing with trucks, planners, and anxious onlookers. Now, the only sounds were birds in the trees and the soft hum of a distant lawnmower. The homeowner stepped outside, looking around at his yard. It felt like he was seeing it for the first time in a week. Every chair, every tent pole, every decoration that had threatened his space was gone. The yard was his again. He walked slowly across the grass, taking in the familiar sense of freshly mown lawn and pine needles. There was a strange mix of relief and lingering tension in his chest. He had one, but he knew the battle was not just over the weekend. It had been about asserting boundaries, about teaching the HOA and the neighborhood that his home was not up for grabs. By mid-morning, the HOA had sent a formal email. It was carefully worded, apologizing for the misunderstanding and acknowledging that the homeowner's property could not be used for community events without explicit permission. It sounded polite, almost conciliatory, but he read it with caution. The legal threat in the previous emails had vanished, replaced by vague promises of improved communication. He knew this was their way of saving face, but he also knew it was a victory. The board members began calling individually over the next day. Each one expressed regret, some offering excuses about misinterpretation of bylaws or miscommunication among board members. He listened patiently, recording each conversation and noting the details. It was important to have a record, in case there were future attempts to push boundaries. Neighbors started talking about what had happened. Some stopped by to compliment his composure, asking how he had stayed so calm. Others expressed relief that the situation was resolved without conflict or violence. A few even admitted that they had quietly supported him from the sidelines, unsure how to step forward themselves. The experience had shifted the perception of him in the community. He was no longer just another homeowner. He was someone who stood firm, knew his rights, and could enforce them calmly. Meanwhile, The couple who had planned the wedding was notified by the HOA that the event could not take place. They were understandably upset, but the homeowner had no direct interaction with them. He had made it clear that this was about his property and his rights. The HOA bore the responsibility of communicating the cancellation and handling refunds. That separation kept him focused and calm, avoiding unnecessary confrontation or emotion-driven decisions. He spent the next few days reviewing the neighborhood's bylaws and suggesting changes to the HOA through formal letters. His focus was on transparency, clarity, and respecting property rights. He recommended that the HOA clearly define which spaces could be used for events and under what conditions. To prevent future misunderstandings, it was a quiet form of justice instead of seeking revenge. He was improving the system to protect everyone. Life slowly returned to normal. He mowed the lawn himself one morning, feeling the familiar rhythm of the work. He walked through the backyard, tending to plants and checking the fence. The house no longer felt like a potential battlefield. The peace he had cherished for years was restored. Stronger than before, in the evenings, he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The neighborhood was calm, the air filled with familiar sounds of life. Occasionally, neighbors walked by, waving or stopping to chat. Conversations were casual now, tinged with a new respect. They had seen someone assert themselves legally and calmly, and it had left an impression. He also reflected on what he had learned. The situation had been stressful, yes, but it had also taught him the power of preparation, knowledge, and patience. Fear and anger could be overwhelming, but when combined with research, clarity, and calm action, they could become tools of empowerment. Standing firm did not mean fighting recklessly. It meant knowing the rules, documenting everything, and responding strategically.